Okay, let's talk about peptides. From Joe Rogan's podcast to the highest levels of the FDA, it really feels like suddenly they are everywhere. On one hand, they're being talked about as these miracle cures for, everything from aging to injuries. And on the other hand, you hear they're risky and totally unproven. So what's actually going on? What's real? What's just hype? And what might actually be dangerous?
Look, if you're feeling a little confused by all the conflicting stuff you see online, you are definitely not alone. It is a wild, wild world out there. You've got legitimate wellness clinics, shady gray market websites, and real medical breakthroughs, all kind of mashed together. So in this explainer, we're going to cut right through all that noise and give you a clear, evidence-based way to understand it all. So here's the game plan. We'll start with what peptides actually are. Then we'll dive into the huge gap between FDA-approved medicine and the totally unregulated market. We're going to unpack the FDA's recent and frankly very confusing decisions and give you a practical guide to know what you're getting. And we'll finish up with a look at the future of this science, which is actually really promising. All right, let's get into it. To really get our heads around this, we have to start with the absolute fundamentals. What exactly is a peptide?
Okay, so think of amino acids as the Lego blocks of your body. When you click a few of those little guys together, you get a peptide. And these peptides, they act like tiny little text messages flying all around your body, giving your cells really specific instructions like grow, repair this, release that hormone, or fight this infection. They're basically the body's own internal messaging app.
And this is a really key point. Peptides are not some new fringe concept. They are a cornerstone of modern medicine. Insulin, which has been saving countless lives since way back in 1921, that's a peptide. Those revolutionary weight loss drugs you hear about all the time, like Ozempic? Yep, peptides. The FDA has approved well over 100 peptide-based drugs. This is absolutely mainstream science.
So if peptides are so established in medicine, where is all this controversy and confusion coming from? Well, it's because right now, we're living in two completely different peptide worlds at the exact same time.
On one side, you have the gold standard, rigorously tested, FDA-approved medicines. And on the other side, you've got the Wild West, this booming market of unregulated compounds that are sold for wellness or for research. Now, they both use the word peptide, but honestly, that's pretty much where the similarity ends. And getting to that gold standard, well, it's not easy. It typically takes a drug somewhere between 10 and 15 years to get through the FDA's incredibly rigorous approval process. They have to prove, without a doubt, that it's both safe and that it actually works. To give you a sense of the scale here, a single phase 3 trial for the weight loss peptide semaglutide, that's Ozempic, had over 1,900 patients in it. They were studied for more than a year just to document all the effects and side effects. That is the gold standard.
Okay, now let's jump over to the Wild West. For a peptide called BPC-157, it's one of the most popular wellness peptides for injury repair. The total number of humans ever studied in published trials is less than 30. Not 1,900, less than 30.
And what about TB500? That's the other half of what people call the Wolverine stack that's super popular in biohacking circles. The number of published human clinical trials for that one? 0. Not a few, 0. This is the massive evidence gap we are talking about.
One expert just summed up the risk of using these unregulated things perfectly. He said, it's like getting gas station sushi. You don't really know if it's sushi, and it may not end well. You're basically buying something with absolutely no quality control, and you have no idea what's actually in that little vial.
So how in the world did we end up in this confusing situation? Well, the answer really lies in a pretty chaotic history of legal rulings and some serious regulatory whiplash from the FDA itself. It all kind of kicked off back in 2013, when a Supreme Court ruling made it harder to patent natural compounds. This, in turn, opened the door for compounding pharmacies to legally make a lot of these peptides. But then, in late 2023, things got chaotic. The FDA suddenly banned 19 of them, which just pushed a lot of users to the even riskier online gray market. Then, in a pretty stunning reversal just a few months later, the FDA unbanned most of them, and now they're saying they're considering legalizing even more. It has been a total roller coaster.
And this brings us to the most crucial point in this whole thing, so please listen closely. When you hear that a peptide was unbanned, it does not, I repeat, not mean it passed the FDA's hardcore safety and effectiveness trials. All it means is that a licensed compounding pharmacy is legally allowed to make it if you have a doctor's prescription. The actual science behind it, the evidence, that hasn't changed one bit.
So understanding that distinction is, well, it's everything.
Let's break down the three main categories of peptides you're likely to run into.
Okay, let's look at this. On one end of the spectrum, you have FDA-approved drugs. Oversight is federal, testing means big human trials, and the quality is guaranteed. In the middle, you have compounded peptides. Here, oversight is done by state pharmacy boards, there's no requirement for human testing, and the quality, well, it can vary. And then way over on the other side, you have the research use only stuff from the gray market. For that, there is zero oversight, zero human testing, and the quality is a complete mystery.
Okay, so with all this complexity, how can you possibly make smart decisions for your own health? It really comes down to just asking the right questions.
First, and this is the mandatory part, I have to be clear, everything we're talking about here is for educational purposes. This is not medical advice. You should always work with a qualified doctor to make decisions about your health, okay?
Here is a simple 4-step framework you can apply to pretty much any health claim. First, what specific problem are you actually trying to solve? Get specific. Second, what's the level of evidence? Are we talking about large-scale human trials or just studies in rats and stories on the internet? Third, have you really looked for all sides of the story? The risks, the criticisms, not just the positive hype. And finally, number 4, weigh the risk. Does the potential benefit truly outweigh the known and maybe more importantly, the unknown risks?
You know, at the end of the day, it really all comes down to this one powerful idea. Biology does not care who supports it. Only the evidence tells you the truth. A tumor doesn't care about a celebrity endorsement. The only thing that actually matters is rigorous, verifiable, scientific proof.
And despite all the hype and all the real risks of the gray market, the future that's being built on that solid evidence, it is incredibly exciting. Peptides really do represent a genuine new frontier in what we call precision medicine.
So, let's wrap up what are the absolute key takeaways here. First, FDA-approved is the gold standard for safety and for proving something works. Second, unbanned is just a legal status. It's not a scientific one. Third, the source of your peptide is everything. Fourth, the future of this science is incredibly bright with targeted new therapies coming down the line. And finally, and most importantly, your health is not a DIY experiment. Please always work with a trusted medical professional.
And that leaves us with a final and I think pretty crucial question. In a world that is just saturated with online influencers and unregulated research chemicals, the responsibility is really shifting onto us. So how do we, as individuals, build the skills to make sure that solid evidence, and not just some compelling hype, is what guides the most important decisions we make about our own health?